So I want to welcome everybody to the second edition of our Second Sight Conversation, highlighting nominees for our 2023 Medium Second Sight Award. Nominations for this award were made by participant reviewers in the 2022 Medium Photo Review, which took place in San Diego on May 5th and 6th of this year. My name is Liliana Hueso, and I am the program manager for Medium Photo, and I'm really happy to have you all here and welcome. Today we are featuring the work of two artists, Amir Saadiq and Gabriela Suarez, with Gabriela Suarez being having the honor of receiving one of our Northern Exposure scholarships organized by Medium Photo. So today what we'll do is each artist will do a presentation about their work, followed by conversations with Linde Lehtinen, who is also the Curator of Photography from the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens. I encourage everyone who's joining us live today to share questions that you may have by using the chat feature. We will also share relevant links to the artist's work from today's program through the chat and share questions with our live audience as well. I also want to mention that we are broadcasting from the unceded lands of the Kumeyaay people, who are the original inhabitants of the Tijuana and San Diego region. The Kumeyaay continue to call this land home and share their culture, stories, art for the greater good. So I'd like to express thanks to the Kumeyaay Nation for sharing this land with all of us. I want to introduce who will begin today with Gabriela. Gabriela Elena Suarez earned a bachelor's degree in Latin American Studies at the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico. From 2015 to 2018, she worked as a cultural manager focused mainly on promotions of photography in Baja California. She was the founder and independent cultural center Nube Nueve in Ensenada, Baja California, a space dedicated to photography, artistic, and social expressions. Her work primarily focuses on documentary photography, gender violence, stereoscopic experimentation, and landscape. She was selected for participating at the National Biennial of Monterrey, ante Arte Emergente, and at the 11th Baja California Photography Biennial in 2018. In 2019 and 2020, she was a part of the photographic production seminar at Centro de la Imagen. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Gabriela. Thank you and welcome, Gabriela.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much to the Medium Photo team for the invitation and to the people who took the time to listen to us today. I'm going to share my screen. So give me some minutes, please, some seconds. Let me share this video. I forgot, the sound. Sorry, I'm going to try again. Okay. Share sound. Okay. Excellent. Can you see the video? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Gabriela Elena Suarez, and I live in the city of Ensenada, a coastal city that is an hour and a half from the border between Mexico and the United States at the height of Tijuana San Diego region. To make the presentation, I'm going to show you this video. The video is made up of 3 pieces. 2 of them are intervention to the urban landscape, and the other is a series of photographs. The photographs were taken in 2 cities, Ensenada and Mexico City. However, I would like you to imagine at the end of the session what your city would look like after what I told you about. The name of my project is Rio de los Remedios, translate into English as the River of Remedies. I choose the name after that of a river located in the state of Mexico, where unfortunately bodies of women victims of femicide has been found. When I was a child, I used to live near that river in the first floor apartment of the building that you see in this video, where I was abused by my stepfather. My mother, out of fear, did nothing about it. The video shows an intervention I did years later when I returned to that place, which consists of covering it in red, as a complaint, but also as a catharsis. I made this video a while ago. Yet today I'm showing it for the first time because it's been emotionally difficult for me to watch this image ever since, due to the symbolic burden that this place has in my life. On the other hand, the name, the River of Remedies, reminds me of the possibility of finding a way to heal the wounds that gender violence has left to thousands of women in the world, but also of finding a way to denounce and seek justice so this violence stops. In 2021, 1,006 femicides were committed through Mexico, a figure that currently doesn't seem to stop in 2022. In Mexico, gender violence is widespread, yet for many people it's too difficult to see because so many related behaviors are normalized. But when you start to look closer, you realize it's everywhere. Gender violence has been covered with a cloak that has been protected and overlapped. If that veil were dyed red and ceased to be invisible, if places that have witnessed violence were marked or covered in red, what would one of the most dangerous cities to be a woman in the world look like? This work began as a catharsis and a form of dealing with my personal trauma. But along the way, while trying to represent how I felt, the main question became how to show the fear that so many women, girls, and boys in Mexico feel, not only in the streets, but in the privacy of their homes and families. How to represent something invisible, but when you take a closer look, it's terrifying. I invite to see how that annoying red goes unnoticed. I'm going to let you to finish this first piece of video. It's around 3 minutes. My methodology was mostly documentary. I made this image while on my daily transit through the streets, where I found these scenarios covered in red, which connect with my thoughts about representing my fear, pain, and trauma. The red tarpaulins became a metaphor of how, when you are aware of gender-based violence, it begins to reveal itself from all angles until it becomes overwhelming, and literally overflows through the drains, at home, on the street, in the intimacy of the family, in relationships, at work, everywhere. During this process, I made two interventions. The one in the apartment when I lived as a child, and what has been part of my personal healing as a denunciation of what had happened. The second intervention was in the River of Remedies in the state of Mexico, as it was channeled where several bodies of women victims of femicide have been found. This intervention consists of letting a red tarpaulin run along the river. The video is very contemplative and tries to evoke a shock between what we are seeing, which from my point of view seems beautiful, very poetic, but when you know what I want to represent, a woman body floating in the river, it becomes terrifying. I found the rest of the image during my daily walks, while wondering, what if all of us, women and girls who have been abused, would cover in red the places where it happened? What would my city look like? Unfortunately, gender violence is found in many parts of the world, not just in the cities I photograph. I think that with photography, we can generate conversation to talk about what hurt us and scare us, to try to change it, and above all, do justice. There is a third video, a tarpaulin that is being moved by the wind. When I saw it, I immediately thought of the beating of a heart. And it made me think that this type of violence is something alive, and that it seems that instead of dismissing, it grows. The lack of empathy for people, for living beings, for the other, has not only increased violence against women and other subjectivities, it has been increasing carried out with more heat. I have questioned myself various things from the aesthetic and plastic point of view around the representation of the fear of disappearing, being murdered or raped, the origin of this type of violence, and the ways those have been systematized and normalized to the degree that there are hardly any public policies seeking to eradicate gender violence. I have also thought about the use of image that turn this violence into a spectacle to generate anesthesia to the pain of others, or a veil to the reality that, at the same time, keeps us from seeing such a saturation. These thoughts forced me to look for other ways of making image from other narratives or aesthetic, whether with a cathartic or denunciation purpose. To finish, I'm going to leave the remaining minutes of this video running. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabriela. Beautiful presentation, both moving image as well as photography. It's really interesting to think about your level of activism, I would say, within a lot of these projects. And I guess one of my first questions, maybe it's a more practical one, but as you've done these interventions, have you yourself felt in danger? Have there been incidents? I'm just curious in terms of this kind of combination that you seem to have of both a kind of performative or performance aspect of intervening with these in these urban landscapes, and then also documenting that in your practice. How has that been for you in terms of the experience, in terms of even instigating a sense of danger too, and you're very active trying to call attention to these femicides?
When I made this intervention, I didn't feel in danger because I know the places that I have to go. So I didn't went by myself. So I have a crew and we went together. So I think this is an activist, but I don't want to put any extra risk in my work. So I feel safe in the moment that I made it, the videos. The photographs is part of my life, my daily transit, the places that I used to visit. So that's I think that's the importance of the images, because it's the daily transit of a woman. And some places could be scary, mostly, at night or in some times of the day, or if you are by yourself. So that's why I made this image, because I feel unsafe when I'm making the pictures. But the intervention and the video, I didn't feel in that way because I wasn't by myself.
Interesting. I like also the combination that you seem to have of thinking about these different perspectives of the land. And like I see, it's like you're taking an aerial view, you're taking a a straightforward view. I just find your approach toward perspective really interesting. How intentional is that with this type of work?
This aerial image and the video, I try to make this shock because I think it's very poetic. If you see this red spot crossing the river, it could be beautiful. But when you know the statement on what I try to represent, it make a shock because it's nothing beautiful, So that's why I made this and use this kind of tools to try to speak about this subject.
And then in terms of the material itself, tarpaulin, how did that come to be? Like, how have you found that also in working with it as a material, in terms of how you work with it, but also like how it reads in a photograph? I think there's a lot of interesting things you can, I was really struck by the shadows it creates, by the different folds, by the different, like you said, it can look like a heart beating. It can, that to me is just fascinating how it transforms. So I'm just curious about how that's evolved for you.
Well, these tarpaulins are very common in the city because the informal commerce use a lot. So you can find blue and yellow, green tarpaulins, and the part of the city that I used to visit use these red tarpaulins. So you can see everywhere. Once you see one, if you are not thinking in red tarpaulins, you are not going to see it. But when you see one and then you start to see again and again and again and again, so for me that's important. Because when you speak about gender violence at the beginning, you don't see it. It's the same with these red tarpaulins. You can see it because it's too normal. It's too normal that find in the city. But when you start to see it, and at the end you see that there are too big and too annoying, and they are everywhere. And it's the same with gender violence. When you pay attention, you realize that it's everywhere and it's annoying, and
Mhm.
it's the same. So that's why I choose this material, because you can find it in the city, but it's also very normalized, you know.
Mhm.
Find these big tents, and they are also very aesthetic, I think, very interesting with this, as you say, these shadows and the texture are very, very interesting. So I have a lot of pictures, not all the picture work for my project, because I have, you know, this texture and these like kind of sculptures, but they are not working for the things that I want to say. But if you see in a plastic way, they are very interesting.
Mm. I like that, seeing in a plastic way. Thank you. Those, yeah. And if anyone has questions that they want to put in the chat, please feel free. We can, as also as we keep going, as questions come up. I'd love eventually, after Amir presents and we talk to together, eventually, I think it'd be great if we could find a way to talk about both Gabriela and Amir's work together and how they connect, because I'm sure that we're going to find a lot of correspondences as well. So do you want to go, we can go ahead and move to Amir for now. Thank you so much, Gabriela.
Thank you to all of you for your time.
Thank you both. And I'm going to move forward in introducing our next speaker, Amir Saadiq. Amir is an artist living and working in San Diego, California. He's interested in exploring visual semiotics and understanding how lived experience determines meaning and processing signs and symbols. His practice focuses on the impossibility of Blackness. Amir investigates how the juxtaposition of evocative objects forces a viewer to question the biases and limitations of cultural institutions and how they have shaped the interpretation of historical truth and artistic value. Amir earned her bachelor's from Howard University in the African American history, and currently an MFA candidate at the UC San Diego. He has exhibited across the United States. So again, we will post relevant links to Amir's work after the presentations for the audience to reference. So please help me in welcoming Amir Saadiq.
Perfect, thank you. And thank you, Gabriela, for such a powerful and personal presentation of your work. So let me attempt to share my screen. Okay, can y'all see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. If you want to put it in full mode, because right now we see all the slides as they're coming in. Maybe switching the windows that you have.
Let me see. It's still showing like that because I'm in presentation mode on my computer.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is your presenter notes versus the full screen.
Okay, hold on. So now what are you saying?
Beautiful, perfect.
Oh. Okay, so it's backwards for me, but that's okay. Okay, so my name is Amir Saadiq. I'm an artist based in Southern California. And I think what I'm going to do for the presentation is kind of walk you through my practice. A lot of the work that was shared for the marketing materials was work from an ongoing project called It Takes a Nation. And I thought what I would do first is kind of explain how I got to that point with that work, and then talk about how the work has kind of grown and changed since I've been in grad school. So let me see. Okay, so basically, you know, I think it's important to kind of talk about the impact that Oakland had in my practice. You know, being in Oakland when I first started making images, I would hang out with elders such as Elaine Brown, Erica Huggins, and work with organizations such as the Anti-Police Terror Project and Homies Empowerment. These were, you know, different organizations that had a community focus and were always just trying to address like social issues that impacted the community. So I think from that, it's important because that kind of contextualizes the why as to why I make images. And doing this, what I've realized is that my work is fundamentally about death. That's either literal death, metaphorical death, or social death of the Black body. So this first image here was made in Oakland, California, and it's an image of Salim Tyndall as a kid. He was murdered on June 23rd, 2018 at the West Oakland BART station. He was 28 years old. So this image here is his son with an image of him as a kid. And I just thought that this was a really powerful image. And, you know, again, I started thinking about different events in Oakland where I was constantly seeing the Black body being murdered. Okay, so this is another image from a different event at the West Oakland BART station. The woman that we see in the photograph is his mother, Yolanda Banks, one of the strongest women that I've ever, have ever met. Throughout the year, at different points, we would visit the West Oakland BART station to make sure that Shalene wasn't forgotten, and also to try to bring some type of justice for this wrong. So this image is one that when I looked at, I just thought the composition of it was really interesting, right? Because I'm seeing who's behind the badge. So it's kind of like this ominous feeling with this strong mother, just front and center. This is another image from a different time with Salim's family where, we were there and it was the 1 year remembrance and justice still hadn't been done. So as I was making this work, I started to notice like the anger of the community, right? So if you look at this image, it's not like it's just one group of people. Like I'm really interested in the emotion of the gentleman at the beginning. So I started to question what it's like when you're a part of a community that don't have the systems that are to protect us in place, right? So the next image that I'll talk about was made in Sacramento, California on March 18th, 2018. This was the murder of Stephon Clark by 2 Sacramento police officers in his grandmother's backyard. They fired 20 rounds into him when all that he had was a telephone. So, I drove from Oakland to Sacramento for this. And this image was just really powerful. This was when I actually first bought my first camera. And I remember being there, and I just thought this was a really powerful image because this was around the time, that all of the stuff in the news was with Kaepernick, the controversy about him kneeling and what it was that he was kneeling for. But also being at this place, the thing that this image doesn't show is this was, it turned, I won't say violent, but a police officer ran over a pedestrian. So again, it was like these people that were supposed to protect the community were doing more harm. So it was like a double harm there. This image was made in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is one of the first times that I put myself into an image. I had just left an opening of an art show where I was followed by police and, surveilled. And I just thought the juxtaposition of this super America with the police behind was a really interesting composition. So that kind of frames like what I was thinking before I got to the project of It Takes a Nation. Okay, so this here is the first image from that series. This is at the 10-year remembrance of Oscar Grant. Oscar Grant was murdered at the Fruitvale BART station. So again, I just thought that it was a really interesting juxtaposition of looking at the time from when Oscar Grant had been murdered up into the events that had occurred recently. Like many people, my first introduction to the Nation of Islam was through the autobiography of Malcolm X. That's a book that I read that changed my life. It set me on this trajectory where I went to Howard University, majored in African-American studies. And from there, my next encounter with the nation was on October 16th, 1995, and that was for the Million Man March. So again, just thinking about what this group has done to protect the community when at all of these events where usually security or something would be needed, that you can't call the police because the police is the ones that had done the harm. This was another image at a remembrance for Oscar Grant. And again, with this image here, it's different people throughout the community. So I think one of the ties for this image that reminds me of Shalene Tyndall is like, here we're seeing like a inner faith, remembrance. So we have someone who's of various religions. So again, it's just kind of like this community aspect of everyone coming together to kind of address situations in the community. The next image I will share is titled Brother Aziz. And this image made me think a lot of Gordon Parks. As someone who's self-taught, when I initially picked up a camera, I would look at a lot of Gordon Parks images and think about like how it was he was able to capture these specific communities, specifically the Nation of Islam, and do it with a way where there was care and unbiased with the image making. So when I saw this image with the Black Lives Matter, the hashtags, I was thinking a lot about the Black body and how it's always reduced to a hashtag, and how many times we're only known after we've passed away, usually in some violent manner. I was also thinking about like where this work would be seen, because this was around the time where people were showing interest in this body of work. And it was really uncomfortable for me to think about where this work would be housed, and understanding that some of the places that this work may be seen would be places that had been violent or historically exclusionary to people who look like me. So when I was thinking about the title, Brother Aziz, what I was attempting to do here is to make sure that this person was known without it being a hashtag in a negative way, but also making sure that anytime someone would see the work, that he would get the respect of having his name said, and it's not reduced to a hashtag. This next image was made in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it's entitled Homewood Ave. And this image is really important to me because this was around the time where I was contemplating whether or not I wanted to come to grad school, and I was, having doubts. And I had taken a job in Pittsburgh. So normally what I would do for this project is anytime I would go to a new city, I would reach out to like some of my contacts and just start documenting or following, different people in the nation in various cities. So I just started a new job, flown out to Pittsburgh for the job, and was supposed to have a dinner. And I decided, nah, I'm not going because I just didn't want to do it. And I ended up like finding the mosque in Pittsburgh. And this image was made a day after someone had been murdered there. And it was just really interesting to see how the community, again, embraced them, because a lot of the places that I would go with the people in the nation is places where I wouldn't see a lot of social services and things of that nature. So this image just kind of like validated to me that I was in the right place. I ended up leaving the job, and obviously I'm in grad school. So this is why that image was so important to me. And then the next image that I will show is this image. This image here, I think is really important to me because when most people think of the nation, I think the connotation that they have is like just Black men in bow ties. And I think it's really important to stress that the backbone of any nation, specifically the Black community, is the Black woman. So I feel like it was really important to be able to show that the nation is not just comprised of men, but also of women. This image also reminds me of an iconic image that Gordon Parks made of a sister in hijab. So this was kind of like an ode to that. This next image here is again, this image was made at Little Bobby Hutton Park in Oakland, California. Bobby Hutton was a Black Panther who was murdered on April 6, 1968 by the Oakland Police Department at the age of 17. So when I look at this image here, again, I think about going back to Yolanda Banks, Oscar Grant's mother, and all of these mothers or grandmothers who have had to be strong because of the violence that the state has persisted on the Black body. So I just thought this was a really powerful photo because of where it was, the name of the park, but then again, we're seeing these Black women having to be just really strong. So around this time is when I was applying to grad school, and my practice had always been pretty much like social or documentary. So moving to San Diego at the beginning of a pandemic, having absolutely no idea of what my work would look like, having no community that I was engaged with. I didn't know what it would turn into. So this is when I started studying a lot. And I was fortunate enough to be able to take classes at UC Irvine with Frank Wilderson and Bridget Cooks. Both of those two, I think, had a really large impact on my practice. Frank, in the sense of providing a theoretical framework for what it was that I'd always felt, but didn't have the language to articulate. And Bridget was able to give me an art historical context to understand that, you know, the art world was just bigger than photography. So it was through her that I discovered two painters who I'll talk about later, but it really kind of changed the way that I started to approach my practice. And also Scenes of Subjection, which just had their 25 years of it. So really good interview that I would suggest all of y'all read. So from that reading and studying, there's a few quotes that really stood out to me and really challenged me to think about what I was doing. The first one is by Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, where he says, "I came into the world imbued with the will to find meaning in things, my spirit filled with the desire to attain to the source of the world. And then I found I was an object in the midst of other objects." And then the second quote that really just caused me to pause and think about what it was that I was doing with the camera. It made me question the dynamic of me as the subject being in front of the lens. It made me question agency, whether or not I felt as if I truly have agency, but also if I, you know, am trying to tell a story or a narrative with photography, what am I doing to the agency of my subject? It also made me think about the paradoxical relationship of being Black, being hyper visible and invisible at the same time. And I was also thinking about invisibility and illegibility. So the quote from Nicole Fleetwood, where it says, "The weight on Black cultural production to produce results, to do something to alter history and system of racial inequality. That is the part constituted through visual discourse. That something," Fleetwood continues, "is the desire to have the cultural product solve the very problem it represents, that seeing Black is always a problem in the visual field that structures the troubling presence of Blackness." So when I think about that mixed with like painting, I started to think about more abstractions. I started to think about the color Black and what that means, how Black as a color embodies every color, but at the same time, it's seen as this absence. So I thought about the paradoxical relationship of being Black again. And the two painters that really jumped out to me was Frank Bowling. And when I look at some of his work, I look at how he went from figurative to more of an abstract way, but I also think about the ties to the transatlantic slave trade that he's mentioning as someone who wasn't American. And then I think about Norman Lewis and his figurative that moved more into abstractions. So even in 1943, we can see that he was painting about many of the same issues that I think my work was about, or what initially led me to pick a camera up. And let me see. Okay, so this is the first image, one of the first images that I made, thinking about being visible and hypervisible, or hypervisible and invisible at the same time. So for these images, this is actually a person, and I was playing with like depth of field and like what the area that I was focusing on to try to trick the viewer into thinking about what it was that they were seeing. But then, as I said, the Fanon quote really like just stuck out to me, and it's one of the things I'm still trying to reconcile now in my practice. But I started thinking about objects. So also during this time, I started collecting found objects. So one of the found objects that I had was a doll. And I started trying to make images where the viewer would question what it was that they were seeing, the human form, and Black and white literally being a binary for this, for the Black body, but also thinking about tricking the viewer into, questioning, is the object a person? So these are a few of those images. And then once I started playing with abstractions, there was always an image that I guess had haunted me. And it was an image of Peter Gordon. So this was an abstract rendition of that image. And again, I think about the hashtags of the name, right? So Peter Gordon is known throughout history as Whipped Pete, as if that's who he was. So this was my image that was kind of like my way of trying to address this image that had always scarred me. So this is an image that I'm sure some of you have seen because it's, in visual culture. But then again, thinking about myself as an object. So this was one of the times that I started to insert myself into the image as the object. Again, just playing off of this concept of what it means to be a person, to be an object, to be human. So this image was made in Savannah, Georgia, while I started visiting plantations in 2021. So I started to think about the land and the violence that had occurred and how I could do some type of abstraction with the land. So I started to move a little bit away from figurative work altogether. And this was one of the first images that was made there. So when I was thinking about how to make these images, I was thinking about using grain as an abstraction, and started using film, so going more analog, but thinking of the materiality of the film and how that could be representative of the body. This was an image that was made in South Carolina, and this is a double exposure. So again, just playing with different ways to play with abstraction. This image here was made at a location where thousands of enslaved had lost their lives battling for their freedom during the Civil War. Another double exposure, but again, just playing with different ways of abstractions. And from there, I started to move just more fully away from complete figurative work at all. I had the pleasure of seeing some of Norman Lewis's work in person, and just really, again, just kind of changed the way that I was looking at work and thinking about image making and thinking about how images were made and how in these paintings he was showing this motion. So I started doing more abstract work from there. And I think I'm kind of pushing time, so let me speed up a little bit. So these were some of the abstractions. And then these are abstractions that I was, again, using during, abstractions that were made using the dolls, the objects. So I'm going to go through this really quick because a lot of people ask, what was the object that was made to use the abstraction. So these are some of the found objects that I had started collecting while in San Diego. And again, it just really made me think about the history of photography and how it has been used for cataloging and indexing the Black body. So there's other projects that are coming off of this, but these are just a few of them. And then I'm going to end by showing a video.
I don't think we can see the video.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the video.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Well, no video because I'm not sure how to get this to.
We can see it now in your view.
You can see the video? Okay. You guys can see the video now?
Yes.
Okay, now it's playing. If you want to go ahead and put it on full screen.
Okay, so I think that's it.
I don't think the video quite played, but we tried to.
Yeah, I don't know how somehow the screens have gotten swapped from when we tried it. So
That's right.
yeah.
We got the sense of it at the beginning, but no, thank you so much, Amir, for leading us through such an incredible evolution of your work, really, so far. I mean, I think that's really, again, powerful images and really hits home in many ways in terms of, both recent events, but also just thinking about, like you said, these deep histories of photography in relationship to the Black body. So one of my questions is for you as I was watching this evolution is, as you were sort of describing yourself, well, I have this, I started with thinking of myself as someone who does documentary practice. How has that process of kind of thinking in a documentary way, or maybe using photography in a documentary way, but then now thinking about it with these inanimate objects like a doll or other forms of abstraction, what's that convergence been like in terms of the challenges? Like how has that challenged you specifically?
Yeah, that's I don't know. I guess the challenge has been like I'm always looking for something that's the embodiment of Blackness, right? Because I think one of the things that I'm always trying to do is have these much deeper conversations about this violence without re-traumatizing my community. And I think a lot about like Kira Walker and how she uses like silhouettes to kind of have those conversations. So I think like, whenever I'm making work, and I think like also, I don't think about things like just photographically now. Now it's like, installation, or there may be a different way that I have to tell the story because like, for some of the things that I want to say or I'm trying to say with the work, I don't know if that's going to resonate with an image. And that's why, one of the things that I'm thinking through now is visual semiotics, right? Like an image can read multiple ways depending on how we're socialized and how we experience stuff. So I think the challenge for me is just thinking about different ways or different means or different mediums to be able to tell stories that I'm trying to tell.
Yeah. Well, I appreciated the way that you're sort of defining or negotiating abstraction, because I like that it's not just about thinking about form, but it is thinking about things like the grain or the blur. I think that to me is a really, fascinating way to sort of extend it, but also to use kind of the language of photography in relation to abstraction. So that's maybe more of an observation, but I think that's really a fascinating thing. And I appreciated too you showing a lot of the resources and references in terms of thinking about different frameworks. And I noticed one of them was Afro-pessimism. Is that something that you could talk a little bit more about?
Sure. Yeah. So Afro-pessimism is just really, I guess, a simple way of saying it's like believing that society is predicated on the social death of the Black body. So again, with Afro-pessimism, I think it gave me a vocabulary around what it was that I was feeling, right? And I feel like there's many times just being, living, that I see it living out in real time. So one of the things that I say, with the work, I'm trying to create a language when language doesn't exist for the gratuitous violence that happens to the Black body repeatedly. So so Afro-pessimism is a framework or a theoretical framework. So when I'm literally, I guess my process would be more so like I will read something like Fanon or something by Wilderson or Sadia Hartman. And for me, I have to try to think about how to create a visual around that. So it's kind of like the theoretical framework first and then the visuals second, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, using that as your guide is really, and again, to see how that's evolved with each body of work, that's fascinating. I guess one thing too, between both of your works, maybe if I can bridge some things, Gabriela, if you want to chime in, if you noticed anything. I'm seeing so many, to me, some of the things that I found between both of your works are this sort of thinking about what is the relationship between land and violence, for example, and then also thinking about the ways that bodies both represent absence, but also kind of intervention. And so those are just some of the things. I don't know if you've observed something, made observations if you've been watching each other's presentations, but if you want to chime in and respond to each other's work, I'd love to have a moment there if that's something that you want to contribute. Because I mean, basically, I felt like this is such a great pairing in many ways, because you're both also wrestling with forms of abstraction. And that's another level too that I thought was really fascinating to think about, but in completely, different ways. But again, I think it's striking to see the comparisons, both of like thinking about the chart, but then also thinking about the doll or the shadows of the doll or the, obscuring different forms. So
Yeah,
maybe that's just more my observation, but.
Yeah, I think one of the things that like I really respect with what Gabriela is doing is how it seems like it's a personal experience. And I think, for me, I try to remove the personal from it. So I thought that was an interesting way that we both approach the work. It is like violence, state sanctioned, whatever, but just like two different approaches to talk about similar, issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Although you do include yourself in your work.
Yeah, but I'm including myself as the object. So like, again, like I said, I think through the Afro-pessimistic lens, I'm really questioning agency and, like what it means to be human, who gets to make those decisions and things of that. So I don't really see myself, I see myself more as an embodiment or a representation more so than it physically being me. I could be the doll. The doll. Absolutely.
Well, I like that you both veer into, the fact that you both have films, you both are thinking much more outside of the dimension of photography. You're sort of expanding the field in many ways too, about how, whether it's more thinking about performance or, activation in different ways. I feel like that's also extends both of your practice quite a bit. I guess my last thing for both, just so we can extend something to the audience too, is what are you working on next? I guess, is there a big project? Is there something that you're currently questioning even, or trying to sort of sort through with each of your works? Is what's next for you?
Hi. Well, I'm thinking I don't want to make more pictures or intervention about this subject. I'm thinking in make the intervention in the image that I already have. For example, thinking in the politics of the fluid, of the thinking, in this body, that it's really important. And as we can see in Amir works, all the violence cross only because we have a kind of body. For example, my body have a woman body. So I'm thinking in, in this politic of fluids. So I'm trying, I want to make an intervention in the prints with some fluids as, for example, semen, because I think it's really really important fluid, thinking in this kind of violence. But I would like to work in something happier, because this is a really, really strong subject. And I think a part of my methodology is work since the angry and try to find justice, but I'm emotionally tired. So I would like to think something happier. Now I am mom, so I would like to question about how it's being mom now. So, something different, but I think at the end I'm going to find always the way to cross with all my main questions. So that's my work in the future.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm in the middle of like going through everything for my thesis project. I graduate this year, and my thesis exhibition will be in San Diego, April 13th through 21st. So if anyone's in San Diego and want to see it, come down. But the project was pretty much still based on Peter Gordon. This past summer, I spent a month in Louisiana and went to the area of where he was enslaved and kind of used Saidiya Hartman's critical fabulation to think about like what his escape would have looked like, you know, what it would have been like to be Peter Gordon, and to try to, you know, just like, you know, channel that through a, I don't even know if a photo or movie or video would necessarily do it. But again, when I think about like this erasure of, you know, Peter Gordon, or whipped Pete as he's called, like just to try to bring context to who this man was. So that's kind of like what I'm working on now. And it's just like, you know, going through and editing and sequencing and getting everything ready for thesis.
That sounds fascinating. It is one of the most difficult images in the history of photography, but we know it's in so many, you know, publications and different things. So no, it's really important work. We do have one last question if we can sneak it in. Someone wanted to know if Amir, if you can talk about the relationship of the embodiment of Blackness and the racialization of space. He notes that both your early work and the exploration have me thinking about the relationship between space, race, and power.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Yeah, Jackie, could you be a little, I guess, be more specific? Like, I don't know how to address that.
Yeah, sure. You know, I guess I'm wondering how you're sort of thinking about how these landscapes can be implicated in race. Like, you're documenting the landscapes, and I'm sort of looking for more cues into these amazing ideas that you're talking about. So I kind of want to know more specifically, like how is race sort of implicated in these new works of yours? Well,
I think race is implicated in everything that I do because it's my perspective, right? But also, like, I think one of the things, like with abstractions, that I've kind of like wrestled with is kind of like letting go. And that's why I think a lot about visual semiotics, because I think when I first started making work or presenting it, as I was learning the theoretical framework, I felt like I wasn't giving people enough room to kind of breathe and take in what it is that they were doing. So I think, you know, moving more towards abstraction, specifically with the landscape, it's kind of like me removing myself from the work a little bit and allowing people to take whatever it is that they want to take from it, right? Like, I always think about the work that I create. I always have this conversation with myself, right? Because again, thinking about like space in general, we can think about like museum space, gallery space, and all of these spaces, landscape, you know, multiple things can be true, depending on who the audience is or how it is that we perceive things. So I'm always thinking about like how to create work where, regardless of what the space that it's in, that the audience that the work is made for will be able to see it, right? So like, I think there's kind of like visual cues or visual codes that I try to put in there for someone who may have lived life similar to me or have certain visual cues that they may recognize. And then if not, I think it's still creating work where anyone has like space to engage with it. So I don't know if that answers the question or.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, with that, thank you for that question. I think we'll close out, but this has been great to chat with you both and to learn more about your work beyond what I learned when I was at Medium in May. So I can turn it back over to Liana, but thank you so much for giving us this space and the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both, Amir and Gabriela, for sharing your amazing, powerful work with all of us tonight. Linde, thank you for being here and your insightful questions and just, you know, moderation. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us. We have one more of our series and Second Sight conversations coming up on November 10th. So feel free to reach out to our website and register for that. But thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you around.